As humanity was pushed further underground into the sewers and basements to begin the guerrilla war, Skynet and its merciless machine forces began to control large amounts of territory and infrastructure. But to defend this against the constant raids and sabotage attacks was a new type of conflict entirely, so Skynet had to fortify its lines. So let's explore how Skynet kept its empire protected. The territory controlled by Skynet is never clearly defined, but if we include all forms of law, so movies, comics, books, well, Skynet's war against humanity was global, with forces in every continent, but some areas were more of a battleground than others. North America seems to be the most brutal of all, with Techcom and the Resistance here being Skynet's most dangerous enemy, and eventually the ones to destroy Skynet's core and win the future war for mankind. We have the Resistance in Russia fighting Mir until it betrayed Skynet, but this also seems a rather active front with many references to the Russian Spetsnaz conducting raids against Mir forces. Europe was more quiet, with humanity being in a far worse state here. Skynet used this as a testing ground for its new machines, as it was deemed a safer area under Skynet's control. Asia, Africa and South America, well, we don't have much information on them, but I imagine Skynet was busy in the main battle zones, and the presence here was smaller, but still humanity would be feeling the horrors and pain of the future war in every corner of the globe, and varying levels of defences and forces depending on the priorities of Skynet at the time. The future war lasted a total of 32 years, starting on August 29, 1997 and ending in 2029. In that time we would have seen a massive shift of technology and tactics, so when we discuss defences we'll have to bear in mind that some would have been effective at the start of the war, but maybe not in the mid or end phase of the future war. So when did Skynet actually start to build up its installations and dig in? Well, immediately after Judgment Day, Skynet had control over its own location, which was Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado. This was the base of SAC-NORAD, which stands for Strategic Air Command North American Aerospace Defense Command. This is one of the world's most heavily armoured and defended strongholds, being a mountain that's been hollowed out, reinforced and armoured. Cheyenne Mountain is capable of withstanding a direct hit from a nuclear missile, so straight away we have a near impenetrable fortress which also housed T-70 autonomous infantry units, T-1 ground assault vehicles and T-200s, plus various automated turrets. These forces were more than capable of stopping any human assault in the disorganised, panicky state that our militaries were in, and to make matters worse, humanity didn't know exactly what or who they were fighting, or that the enemy was located at Cheyenne Mountain. So Skynet was, as far as anyone's concerned, invisible for now. From here, Skynet seized valuable infrastructure, raw materials, supply stores, also production facilities that had survived Judgment Day, and were still in a state that could be put to use immediately. The defences at this early stage would have been light, with most installations having pre-existing walls made from brick or concrete, maybe even topped with barb or razor wire. Lower security areas might be protected by chain link fences or a steel door. Just the basics expected in human society really, but nothing particularly heavy duty. Obviously Skynet would have supplemented these, but with its limited resources, this would have consisted of using things like salvage CCTV cameras for surveillance, using the T-200 to collect scrap and build makeshift walls and barricades to limit access to these sites. Still, they would need to keep a way open so Skynet could deliver supplies and pick up what it needed. And if the installation was particularly valuable, well, a T-70 or 2 might be sent to protect them with its powerful minigun, and the T-1 would become a common sight as a sentry for bases. Humanity would require a well-armed force to have any chance against these garrisons, and things like scavengers and raiders would steer clear of these areas once a few humans had been blown to bits and word of danger spread. I think Skynet would have raided surviving military supply depots, but this would have been done strategically to make sure its forces didn't get into a major fight with surviving military elements who also might be looking for supplies and could stand up to Skynet's earlier basic machines. And the specific things being looked for in defensive terms would have been weapons such as landmines, claymores, remote explosives, also surveillance equipment, proximity sensors, even things like large stockpiles of razor wire and deployable obstacles. These wouldn't have been Skynet's main priority resource-wise, but once it had established its logistics, the gathering of defensive supplies would be important. In the early years of the future war, the opposition forces to Skynet would have been pretty limited, with bands of scavengers and raiders being the ones most likely to stumble upon Skynet's facilities and probably being killed pretty quickly. And actual military forces like the Resistance were few and far apart. This would lead to Skynet believing defences were not as important as pushing the attack and eliminating what remained of humanity, which led to Skynet's facilities being barely more defended than their pre-war state. And once the resistance began to organise, these would have been easy targets for ex-military types who have the skills and a little bit of C4 handy. This would culminate into the loss of vital resources and breaks in the supply chain that should have never happened to Skynet. This is why it would significantly invest in defensive technology and resources in the future. The first major change would come with heavy fortifications of existing facilities. We'll start with the passive defensive assets. These are things that minimise the effectiveness of hostile threats without engaging in active defence. These include strategies such as detection, warning, camouflage, concealment, deception, dispersion and sheltering. These measures are designed to reduce the impact of enemy actions and enhance the survivability of forces and assets. So it would be common to see large reinforced concrete walls surrounding facilities, around 15 to 30 feet in height, but these could get into the colossal size in specific locations. These could even be using hyper-alloy instead of steel in the reinforcement for even more resilient walls. And these walls would have been several feet thick to resist explosives and breaching attempts. It would require heavy weapons or very powerful explosive charges, artillery or tank support to break through them. These walls would also be dug deep to block any chances of tunnelling, which may seem unlikely but is a valid tactic, though it's very time consuming. And these walls would be topped with thick razor wire or sharp spiked obstacles to shred anyone stupid enough to try to assail them. But the key to the walls is simply to deter attacks, as it would require significant forces to get past these types of obstacles, so they defeat many types of threats just by being imposing. And it's not just walls that fall into the obstacle category. This also includes tank trap style objects that could range from basic designs made of scrap metal in the early war, to hyper-alloy ones in areas where stopping enemy armour is paramount. As I mentioned earlier, barricades would be very effective for blocking troops and vehicles. These could be made with everything from cars to furniture salvage from the surrounding area, and early war it would be common sight to see a T-200 building makeshift junk barricades to shut down roadways and to block access to buildings, to simply make these areas very difficult to get into and slow down any force that intends to attack. This would also link in well with the scavenging that the T-200 did throughout the war to salvage resources, with it being very easy for them to toss non-useful items into these makeshift barricades. This is a bonus to their salvaging missions and reduces the time spent building the barricades overall. And all of these obstacles are not just to block forces but also to funnel them into other traps and kill zones, especially when it came to less organised and non-trained human forces. I imagine many were funneled into areas where they were massacred early on in the war. These obstacles and walls would be pointless without doors or gates for Skynet forces to access the areas they protected, but as the war progressed, Skynet had to go from basic steel doors to reinforced blast doors that would require specialist equipment for the resistance to get through, be these hacking tools or blowtorches to cut through them. And far heavily guarded facilities required massive blast doors weighing in excess of hundreds or even thousands of tons. Once these were installed, you needed extremely specialist equipment to get through these. Pretty much the only way was hacking through them. They were almost indestructible, and the only thing that might actually break through them would be a direct nuclear strike. But even then, there's a chance that some of these blast doors would still hold. Another obstacle of sorts, but of a more lethal variety, are mines, with Skynet making ample use of them. As we all know, mines can be of many types, with some designed to kill soldiers and other vehicles. They not only destroy the enemy force who are foolish enough to trigger them, but they are fantastic use of area denial, causing the enemy to either avoid the mine location, which may cause them to turn around, or to be funneled into a more desired location for an engagement. They can also be used in kill zones being supported by gun turrets or terminators, that will open fire once the enemy has triggered the minefield, which will cause panic and chaos and most likely maximise the amount of casualties inflicted. Skynet also advanced mine technology into a living mine, the so-called Silverfish, or its true name, the Cyberdyne System Series C Segmented Autonomous Scout Assault Drone. This machine was placed in small circular metallic housings on the surface of the ground. They used proximity and audio sensors to detect potential threats but could differentiate between Skynet forces and hostiles. This is a major step up from normal landmines, as friendly forces can pass through a mined area safely, and this allows you to use the Silverfish as not just area denial but also a type of sentry. And you can potentially use machine forces to lure humans into a mined area with this identification ability. These mines can also communicate, so once one Silverfish is triggered, others in the local area will also become activated. The real strength of the Silverfish is that they're not just smart mines, but they're also mobile. Once activated, they leap out of the housings and roll towards their targets at a decent speed, around 10 miles per hour. But en masse, this is a scary prospect, where dozens of rolling mines close in on their targets. And the Silverfish seem to be able to follow their targets for miles, meaning that if you run, the Silverfish will pursue, and the only sure way to stop them is to destroy them. And they're fairly tough, able to take multiple rifle rounds, and it's advised to shoot them with plasma or more powerful weaponry. But even if you destroy them, they're going to explode, and the power is substantial. They will kill any soldier, and be able to destroy light vehicles and damage or cripple medium or heavy vehicles such as tanks. If the Silverfish is able to get directly under something like a main battle tank, significant damage is going to be done, and it wouldn't be a stretch for Skynet to make even more powerful versions, making some truly insanely powerful living mines. Another great feature of the Silverfish is the fact that with its proximity trigger being around 30 meters in circumference, you can cover a large area with these, as 100 could cover a 3-kilometer line, and combined with their ability to move and chase targets, they can be placed in any type of terrain, be it urban ruins or a forest, as once triggered the Silverfish can traverse anything, bar a sheer wall or a cliff. They can manoeuvre around obstacles and slip through gaps. It creates a nightmare scenario where they can be hidden behind line-of-sight blocking features, and once the unlucky soldier triggers one, all hell breaks loose, and before you know it, hundreds of these are moving in from every direction. Skynet just gave mine warfare a new terrifying level, and if the Silverfish doesn't explode, it can return to its housing where I expect it draws power from, so it can recharge and wait for the next prey to enter its proximity zone. If you are brave enough and skilled enough to pass through the mines, then it's time for the automated turrets, and Skynet gives us a smorgasbord of choice. They range from smaller turrets armed with light or heavy machine guns that can shred infantry and light vehicles, and once Skynet plasma technology became more common, the turrets would also be armed with rapid-fire plasma that can destroy all hostile threats, be it troops or even tanks, with enough shots being able to burn through their thick armour. We would also see far larger turrets built for special purposes, such as anti-aircraft and anti-missile defence turrets with missile versions for engaging hostile aircraft at long range, supported by turrets built for close-range interception similar to the Phalanx Seawiz, which is a heavy-point defence system. These not only can shred close-range aircraft and missiles, but can also be turned on ground targets, which would turn troops and vehicles into Swiss cheese in seconds. Turrets provide Skynet with a very effective killing tool that can engage targets at good ranges, easily reaching out to a mile plus, and if placed on a high-up position with good lines of sight, a single turret could cover a couple miles of territory. It's a very low resource investment that can protect an area and potentially inflict quite a few casualties on resistance forces. And these turrets were regularly combined with walls, obstacles and mines to make defensive strongpoints that caused humans to completely avoid the area, and the only force brave enough to even attempt an assault would be found later in the war when humanity could support major military assets. Huge missile batteries have also been spotted by resistance intelligence operatives. These are used for bombardment of targets normally at great distances, but could also attack close-range targets. The missiles themselves are very large and would be able to level any building, and with sustained bombardment even crack bunkers. They present a major threat to the resistance, being able to destroy any build-up of forces near Skynet's territory, and would force the resistance to have to disperse their men and armour to avoid casualties. This also stops concentration of forces when attacking, and these batteries would have to be destroyed for any large-scale breakthrough into Skynet territory to be possible. And the missiles would be capable of carrying different types of warheads, with Skynet able to use everything from high explosive, plasma warheads, or even incendiaries to burn targets out if needed. To support these turrets and missile batteries, Skynet would construct advanced radar and long-range scanning facilities. These would be able to intercept communications, which would cause the resistance to start to use paper and pencil to pass important orders which they could burn after. It was the only way to keep this information secure, as unless Skynet physically intercepted the message, it could not get access. Radar would keep the skies under surveillance to keep any remaining human aircraft scared to even take off. As soon as they did, they were detected, and HK aerials and jets supported by long-range anti-air missiles would be closing in on their positions. And even the oceans didn't get a pass, with sonar stations being deployed to locate the submarines, as the resistance had many under their command, with rumours that some had nuclear weapons, holding back for the killing blow against Skynet. An important tactic to maximise the use of the turrets was the clearing of line-of-sight blocking features. As many of Skynet's earlier facilities were located in ruined towns or cities, this meant these installations were surrounded by cover with ample ways for hostile troops to sneak close to the walls and out of sight of turrets and sentries. This was also a potential problem when heavy woodlands or jungles were present, so clearing, or in the case of buildings literally flattening these obstacles, had to be done. It was a time-consuming job with many machines needed to fell the trees or buildings, and then remove any debris so it couldn't be used as cover, but it was worth the time. This also ties into Skynet's scorched earth tactics that would deny any viable resources to raiding teams. We have to remember Skynet's resource needs revolve around materials and fuel. Things such as food, clean water and medical supplies were a human concern. So once the machines had secured an area thoroughly, they would begin burning any crops or edible plants, even torching trees and buildings, and the T-808s with their flamethrowers would be in their element, and anything not consumed by the fire would be shot, crushed and blasted apart. The idea was smart: limit what resources can be available to your enemy, and even if the resistance broke through the front lines, they would have to maintain those supply lines, as there was little chance of foraging and finding the essentials to keep human soldiers going. This also made the resistant forces far more dependent on its logistics, and if Skynet could cut them off for even a short time, the effects would be far worse than in previous human conflicts. Skynet would seize and construct facilities to control the satellites that orbit the Earth. These would be priority to Skynet's global war, and without them there is no way it could communicate and control its vast machine army. It would also invest significantly in long-range jammers to disrupt their communications, but also limit humanity's access to the satellites and pre-Judgment Day infrastructure, which they may try to access to aid their cause. And as the war continued and more territory was captured, the front lines would become far larger. This led to the building of large amounts of storage facilities, particularly plasma storage, as once plasma weapons became commonplace for Skynet, these facilities could not only rearm its forces, but also refuel them. Skynet, being extremely intelligent, would learn new tricks over the course of the war. One such trick would be decoy bases. From the outside they would look the part: large concrete walls, turrets and a fair amount of terminators to defend them, most likely older models like the T-400 or T-500. But these bases would be a juicy target for the resistance. Skynet might even leave some small gaps in the defences that can be exploited, but once the resistance began their assault, well, they would be in for a big surprise. The base itself would be a maze of obstacles, funneling troops into kill zones with men being picked off as they pushed further in. Any chance to retreat would be blocked by the activation of smart mines or explosives, causing the exit points to be sealed off. The only choice would be to push further forward into the gauntlet of turrets, terminators and traps. And even if they were able to fight deep into the base, it would be filled with hollow shells. Buildings that looked the part from the outside, but nothing of value was on the inside. Many a resistance force would fall for these traps, and it would make picking targets all the more difficult. We would also see more advanced units such as a T-800 with its organic skin sometimes being held back in defensive lines, waiting for resistance assaults to begin, at which point they would attempt to blend in with the assault forces, locating key targets and then either moving with them back to a resistance stronghold or eliminating high-value targets. This kind of defensive-style infiltration could be devastating, especially as it would make the resistance think they had scored a victory, but in reality they had lost that battle, they just didn't know it yet. A simple but highly effective tactic would be to conceal bases and installations, to hide in plain sight. This normally meant that Skynet would make its facilities look like run-down old human buildings, that blend in well with the surrounding ruined towns, and its defences were hidden and T-series models were also placed in nearby ruins. Concealed not to draw attention, only activating if the enemy got too close to the base. This tactic was smart, as with such a vast territory to search it would mean the resistance overlooked many of these areas, especially as there were many large Skynet facilities that caught the attention of Resistance High Command. More active defence measures would supplement the static ones, with patrols being a key to keeping Resistance forces at bay, ranging from basic infantry patrols composing of more advanced Terminators such as T-600s and 800s in major hotspots of the war, as they would expect to have regular firefights with the Resistance forces they discover, so bringing these advanced machines makes sense. For the rear lines and more safe territories, T-400s and T-500s would do, with only vital installations getting higher quality models on patrol duty. It wouldn't just be infantry on these duties, with hunter-killers joining the party. The most commonly seen was the HK Aerial, being able to cover huge amounts of ground and respond quickly to any threats, and the Mark 8 variant with the built-in drones would excel in this role. And if carrying an infantry transport pod, well, it could deploy a T-series fire team of up to 8 machines to repel a resistance force. Things such as HK tanks and heavy vehicles would be very rarely seen on patrol. They were better utilised on assaults and wouldn't be wasted in the back lines. Smaller HKs such as Skynet's HK-003 Hellhound attack robot, with their speed and mobility, would regularly be sent on patrols as hunter packs, specifically in terrain such as humanity's ruined cities and dense forests and jungles, where the environment makes it very difficult for vehicles to work. So these smaller attack dogs would be fantastic for traversing that terrain and using their close-range sensors to close in. And obviously, once in close range, they don't have to worry about using their weapons. They can literally bite down the humans they find and tear them to pieces. It's not just effective in killing terms, but also psychologically. Sentries and guards for various facilities would be a mix of T-series models and hunter-killers, but unlike human guards, machines don't get tired, don't lose concentration, and can go for months if not years depending on the model and its power source. Imagine sneaking up on a Skynet facility in a T-600 that you've been keeping an eye on for days is just waiting. You know you have to destroy it. There's no bathroom breaks or changing of the guards. The nature of machines means defences would have far less gaps in security than with us humans, and it would make raid and sabotage attacks even more high risk than they already are. Sentries wouldn't just be posted at bases. With the advantage that machines can operate sometimes for years without the need for any type of recharge or refuelling, something like a T-600 armed with a sniper rifle or machine gun could be positioned somewhere high up, maybe a ruined apartment block or a mountainside, and just wait, observing for a human to cross its path, then bang, and one less for Skynet to worry about. This would be a nightmare for human teams going deep into Skynet territory, as no matter where they travel there is a risk of being attacked by Skynet forces. They could never let their guard down. It would be exhausting and paranoia-inducing. This sentry-style ambush would be made into an art by the T-500 Reavers. Yes, this horrific monster we covered previously. It was now worth its weight in gold to Skynet, with large amounts of T-500s available to be converted into these close combat killers. Skynet had a mobile machine trap that not only could wipe out entire squads who are unfortunate enough to trigger it, but also the psychological impact may cause the amount of volunteers for missions into Skynet territory to drop significantly. If the Resistance was assaulting bases that were production facilities for Terminators, or the specialist cold storage facilities that contained the T-800s, where they are kept before they are issued a mission, these attacks would trigger the activation of all units in the base. So the Resistance thinks it has to just deal with the defences, and before they know it, potentially hundreds of T-800s are coming straight at them, a force that could rip entire battalions apart with their bare hands, or should I say, metallic hands. Rapid response forces would be on standby in case of a major assault, or if a raiding or saboteur party was discovered but had escaped the initial forces engaging them. The key element of the response forces would be the HK aerials, most likely with the infantry transport pods. They'll be able to close in on the area under attack, disembark their transport pods, and once the ground forces began to close in, they would provide supporting fire, but also reconnaissance and extraction if the deployed forces are needed elsewhere. These response forces could be set up to cover areas of around 50 to 100 miles. With the rapid speed of the HK aerial, this distance can be crossed in minutes, and it allows Skynet to have a counter to insurgency forces without having to deploy too many resources into it. Another role of rapid response forces would be emergency evacuation and relocation of priority assets. Something such as Skynet's core itself could be moved with heavy vehicles or large aircraft like the HK bomber. So in the event that the Resistance had a massive force closing in or surrounding an important facility, or if Skynet predicted an attack from something like a long-range missile or nuclear weapon was likely, its forces would swoop in and get the most valuable equipment and resources to a safe location. This links to backup sites. Skynet was logically minded, in some ways at least, and it would have fail-safes for its defences, in terms of strongholds and bases that were built specifically for an emergency situation. These bases can immediately receive something as important as Skynet's core, and have it well defended, and give it access to things like large power supplies. One major genius move by Skynet is that its defensive bases and outposts seem to be constructed from reusable modular materials. This means once something like a plasma storage facility is built over a few days near the front lines for rearming of forces, it doesn't have to stay there permanently. It can be deconstructed and moved with the advancing front line. This would save Skynet huge amounts of resources in the long term, and it also means less empty structures left in case the Resistance retakes territory, so less equipment and material to risk being captured. Skynet would have to create a dedicated construction force for this task, but I imagine the T-200 supported specifically by converted HK aerials and construction vehicles would be perfect for the task. And what actually reminds me of this is how the Romans carried their kind of fortress walls or these small fort walls with them. So as soon as they set up camp, they could set up fortresses really quick. And in a sense, that was a reusable material. But Skynet has obviously done it in a more advanced sci-fi term. And it's actually probably one of the best defensive strategies it employed for the entire future war. Skynet also wouldn't be slow to tear down or decommission any structures that no longer serve a purpose. Unlike human militaries that have to factor in politics, people's jobs and lives, Skynet has one factor in the choice. Is this facility useful for the resources needed to maintain and run it? If yes, it stays. If no, it's gone. Brutal, but efficient. Another odd thing to factor in is Skynet's human allies, collaborators. These useful meatbags and traitors to our species had a place in Skynet's plan, well, for now. But Skynet would keep them close to the front lines and only permit a certain amount in places like slave labour camps and prisons. This was for two main purposes. First, to stop the chance of infiltration, as if you have collaborators going all over the place, the Resistance could use this to sneak in, so the fact that they are contained to very specific areas allows Skynet's forces to keep the shoot-on-sight on humans in their own territory. No chances of friendly fire. Not that Skynet would care much. Secondly, if the collaborators ever tried to betray Skynet, well, they're contained to certain facilities and the front lines, so it's easy to move forces in to wipe them out. And I'd imagine Skynet kept at least a few machines close by its human allies for when it came time to Order 66 them, let's say. Now, we've spoken a lot about defences, but what happens if the Resistance is able to amass a force strong enough to actually break through? Well, Skynet most likely used defence-in-depth tactics, with multi-layered defensive lines designed to stop any force no matter how large from rushing through. With a mix of ground and supporting aerial forces, obstacles, mines, turrets and strongpoints, the Resistance forces would become bogged down and ensnared in an attrition battle that would cost vital lives and equipment. And even if they could overcome these defences, it gives Skynet time to respond with its own forces. This is why the Resistance had to resort to guerrilla tactics. But with Skynet's very thorough and effective defence strategy, I can't imagine how many raids failed. The success rate must have been as low as 1 in 50. And for a good amount of the war, I don't think this would have improved, not until the mid to later stages. And to finish off, we need to talk about Skynet's core and what the defences around it would look like after 32 years of time to fortify. So if Skynet stayed at Cheyenne or relocated, it doesn't really matter. The stronghold it built would be beyond anything that could realistically be cracked unless you're using direct nuclear attacks followed up by huge organised military forces with ample support. I imagine the base itself would have an exclusion zone around it of at least 10 miles, where everything is flattened, no obstacles to block line of sight. This would be overwatched by turrets of all kind, plasma, anti-air, missiles, flat guns, every kind available. With a minefield covering this entire zone, a mix of anti-personnel and anti-vehicle mines, with silverfish in the tens of thousands mixed in for a truly impassable landscape. There would be bunker-style positions containing terminators and hunter-killers, but these would be dug into the ground with only a small low firing port being above the surface. This is so these fortifications wouldn't provide any cover for invading forces. And each bunker would be isolated, no tunnels or access to each other, so if one falls the Resistance cannot use it to get through the exclusion zone. If the Resistance was able to get through this gauntlet of death, it would come up against a massive perimeter walls. These walls would also be bristling with killing machines and turrets, and I'd expect multiple walls with no man's land in between with a mix of mines, tank traps, and I could even see a moat but not with water, probably a lethal toxic sludge just for good measure. And even if you get past this, well, Skynet would have tens of thousands of Terminators and Hunter-Killers ready to defend their master. And these wouldn't be backline T-400s. We would see T-800s, T-900s, HK aerials, HK tanks, and probably some unknown prototypes that would be unleashed in a last-ditch defensive attempt. And the actual stronghold containing the core is going to be more fortified than the seed vaults in Norway. And I think by the time human forces are actually able to breach through the tens of meters thick hyper-alloy blast doors, well, Skynet would have probably cooked up some insane escape plan. You have to remember, any Skynet forces would converge to the core to protect it. We could see millions of machines descend upon the Resistance forces. Also, we have to think about the T-Meg at the core, so the super poly alloy stabby monster is going to be the final boss. So yeah, it's going to be one hell of a final mission for humanity. Also, Skynet would probably only allow access to the site through air, and with the amount of anti-aircraft weapons and HK aerials and jets ready to defend the skies, there's no chance of infiltration. So there we have it, a whole toy box of fun defensive tactics Skynet employs to kill you and me. But don't fret, men, we will endure, we'll beat the machines back, and thank God we have the numbers. So let me don my Commissar's cap, load my bolt pistol, and prepare to be in the next wave. And as always, have a beautiful evening, and thanks for watching.